I ghosted my boyfriend of 5 years for a month. Now he says I ended it and he's never coming back. Okay. So I need to tell you about the most insane breakup situation that happened to me. And honestly, it's going to make you lose faith in men completely. I'm Lucy. I'm 27 and I just watched a 5 year relationship get thrown in the trash because my boyfriend couldn't handle dating an actual independent woman. So Luke and I had been together since we were basically kids, met in college, did the whole growing up together thing. We've been living together for 2 years in this nice apartment, splitting everything 50/50 like real adults. I thought we had something solid, you know, but apparently Luke had been looking for any excuse to bail. The second things got remotely challenging. The whole disaster started because I'd been going out more with my girlfriends lately. Nothing crazy, just happy hours, weekend brunches, normal stuff that women in their 20s do. But Luke works at some soul crushing corporate job that leaves him exhausted every night. So he'd come home wanting to collapse on the couch and talk about our relationship for hours. Meanwhile, I'm 27 and still want to actually enjoy my life instead of sitting around analyzing every tiny interaction we have. Luke started getting weird about my social life pretty quickly. Suddenly, he's asking a million questions about where I'm going, who's going to be there, what time I'll be back. Like I'm some teenager who needs permission to leave the house. The worst part was how he'd try to sneak peeks at my phone when I was texting my friends about plans. So invasive and controlling. One night, I came home around midnight from a girl's dinner, and Luke was sitting there in the dark like he'd been waiting up for me. He starts interrogating me about my entire evening, who was there, what we talked about, why I hadn't texted him updates. I told him he was being paranoid and jealous, that I'm allowed to have friends and a social life outside of our relationship. But he wouldn't drop it. He kept pushing, saying something felt different between us lately, that I seemed distant. Different how? Because I didn't want to spend every waking moment catering to his insecurities. I called him out on his controlling behavior, and that's when things really escalated. Then he hits me with this ridiculous question about whether I'm happy in our relationship. Obviously, I'm happy or I wouldn't be there. But the way he asked it, all serious and concerned, like he was already planning our breakup in his head. It felt like he was looking for problems where none existed. I got defensive because, honestly, who wouldn't? Here's this guy I've been loyal to for 5 years, suddenly questioning everything just because I don't want to be glued to his side constantly. I told him his jealousy was becoming unattractive and that he'd gotten boring and predictable. Maybe I said some other things too about how he never wanted to do anything spontaneous anymore, how he'd turned into this anxious, needy version of himself. The conversation kept spiraling because Luke has this obsessive need to talk through every single issue immediately. Everything has to be analyzed and resolved right away on his timeline. But sometimes you don't need to dissect every feeling to death. Sometimes people just need space to breathe and figure things out. When I told him I needed some time and space to think about everything, he completely panicked. Started firing off all these desperate questions about what that meant, how long, if we were breaking up. I told him I'd reach out when I was ready to discuss things. And that I needed time to process without him hovering over me and pressuring me for answers. I wasn't trying to punish him or play games. I genuinely needed space to figure out if I wanted to be with someone who couldn't trust me to have basic independence. His reaction to my simple request for breathing room told me everything about his emotional maturity level. So I gave Luke exactly what he needed, a real lesson in respecting boundaries. For an entire month, I didn't respond to his texts, didn't answer his calls, and basically showed him what life would be like if he kept acting controlling and possessive. It was honestly the most peaceful month I'd had in years. The first week, he was blowing up my phone constantly. Text after text asking if I was okay, if we could talk, saying he missed me and wanted to work things out. It was actually pathetic how quickly he went from making demands to basically begging for my attention. I'd see his name pop up on my screen and just delete the messages without reading them. Since we lived together, things got awkward at home, but I handled it maturely. I'd be polite but distant when we crossed paths. He'd try to start conversations and I'd give him simple answers and walk away. I wasn't being cruel, just showing him that actions have consequences and that I was serious about needing space. It was amazing how much better I felt without his constant need for validation and communication. I could come and go as I pleased without getting the third degree. I could text my friends without someone trying to read over my shoulder. I could just exist without having to explain myself every 5 minutes. My girlfriends were so supportive during this time. They'd take me out and listen to me vent about how exhausting Luke had become with all his jealousy and control issues. We'd go dancing and I'd actually have fun instead of worrying about what time I needed to be home to avoid another interrogation. I even met some really interesting guys who knew how to have actual conversations without immediately jumping into relationship drama. This one guy, Marcus, was particularly sweet. We'd chat at the coffee place near my work, and he was just so easy to talk to. No pressure, no jealousy, just genuine interest in getting to know me as a person. I wasn't doing anything inappropriate, obviously. I'm not a cheater. But it was refreshing to remember that there were men out there who could appreciate a woman's independence instead of feeling threatened by it. Men who could hold conversations without making everything about their own insecurities. Meanwhile, Luke started working even longer hours, which honestly proved my point about how checked out he'd already become from our relationship. If he was really fighting for us, wouldn't he be trying harder to be present? Instead, he was basically hiding at the office, probably wallowing in self-pity. When he was home, he'd look at me with these wounded puppy dog eyes, like I was supposed to feel guilty for standing my ground. But I wasn't falling for the emotional manipulation. I'd asked for space and time to think, and that's exactly what I was taking. If he couldn't handle that basic request, it said everything about his character. Around week 3, Luke's texts started getting less frequent. Part of me was proud that he was finally learning to respect my boundaries, but another part was annoyed that he was giving up so easily. Like, if you really love someone, don't you fight a little harder? Don't you show them they matter enough to wait for? The whole month was honestly eye-opening. I realized how much energy I'd been putting into managing his emotions and walking on eggshells to avoid triggering his jealousy. Without that constant pressure, I felt like myself again, confident, independent, free to make my own choices. By the end of the month, I felt clear about what I needed to say to him. I'd had time to process our fight without his constant attempts to rush me into forgiveness. I was ready to have a mature conversation about boundaries and expectations moving forward, assuming he'd learned his lesson about trying to control me. When I finally decided to reach out after exactly 30 days, I felt generous and forgiving. I was ready to give us another chance, but with better boundaries this time. I sent him a simple text saying, "Hey, I think we should talk," and figured he'd be grateful for the opportunity to work things out. But his response completely destroyed me. He texted back saying he'd moved on and was seeing someone else now, someone from his work named Naomi. Just like that. 5 years thrown away because he couldn't wait 1 month for me to process my feelings like an adult. I immediately called him because I couldn't believe what I was reading. When he picked up, his voice was different, calmer somehow, but also colder than I'd ever heard it. I asked him what he meant about seeing someone else, and he had the audacity to tell me that our relationship had ended the day I stopped communicating with him. Ended, I told him I needed space, not a breakup. There's a massive difference that any mature person would understand. But Luke acted like me, taking time to think was some kind of abandonment. He said that ignoring someone for a month wasn't taking space. It was ghosting them, which is such a dramatic way to describe me setting healthy boundaries. Then he dropped this bomb about Naomi had been there for him during this difficult time, that she actually listened to him and didn't play mind games. Mind games, I was taking care of my mental health and setting boundaries. If he couldn't understand that basic concept, it proved exactly why I needed the space in the first place. I asked him how long this workplace affair had been going on, and he said they'd gotten close over the past few weeks. While I was giving him the space he clearly needed to grow as a person, he was already moving on with some random coworker. It felt like such a betrayal of everything we'd built together over 5 years. The worst part was how emotionless he was about the whole thing. No regret, no sadness about our relationship ending, just cold statements about how he'd found someone who actually wanted to be with him. As if I hadn't wanted to be with him. I was literally trying to improve our relationship by working on myself first. I told him this was basically cheating, that you don't start dating other people when your girlfriend is just taking some time to think. But he said there was no relationship left to cheat on after I'd made it clear I didn't want to communicate with him. Such a convenient way to rewrite history and avoid taking responsibility for his betrayal. After that devastating phone call, I went into full crisis mode. There was no way I was going to let some workplace flirtation destroy 5 years of my life. Luke was obviously going through some kind of rebound situation, and I needed to snap him out of it before he did something he'd really regret. I tried showing up at his office during lunch, thinking if I could just talk to him face to face, he'd remember what we had together. But he said he was too busy to meet, obviously avoiding me because he knew he was making a huge mistake. I wrote him this long, heartfelt letter explaining everything I'd been feeling during our time apart and how much I wanted to make things work. I left it on his car with some of his favorite homemade cookies, but he never even acknowledged receiving it, which showed how far this Naomi person had already gotten into his head. I started checking his social media obsessively, which was torture, but I needed to understand what was happening. Suddenly, he was posting pictures of hiking trails and coffee shops, places we used to go together, but now he was clearly going with her. It felt like he was deliberately trying to hurt me by replacing our memories. So I decided to show him what he was missing. I started going out more, posting pictures of myself looking incredible at restaurants and bars. If Luke wanted to try to make me jealous, I could play that game too. I made sure to look amazing in every photo and tagged locations I knew he'd follow. I reconnected with Marcus from the coffee shop and started seeing him more seriously. He was everything Luke had stopped being: attentive, supportive, genuinely interested in my thoughts and feelings. When we'd go out, I'd post subtle pictures that showed I was with someone without revealing who. Let Luke wonder what he'd given up. But even while I was having fun with Marcus, I couldn't stop obsessing over Luke and this Naomi woman. I needed to understand what made her so special that he'd throw away everything we'd built. So I did what anyone would do. I researched her online. Her social media was annoyingly wholesome. Pictures with her family, her dog, hiking adventures, volunteer work. She worked in some administrative role at Luke's company and seemed like one of those relentlessly positive people who probably never had a deep thought in her life. Definitely not Luke's usual type. What bothered me most was how basic and boring she seemed. If Luke wanted someone completely different from me, couldn't he have at least picked someone interesting, someone with personality or edge? Instead, he'd chosen this plain woman who probably never challenged him or pushed him to grow. I started asking our mutual friends what they'd heard about Luke's new relationship. Most of them were shocked we'd broken up and couldn't believe he'd moved on so quickly. A few mentioned seeing him around town with someone new, but that he seemed different, more confident, they said, which was ridiculous because I'd been trying to build his confidence for years. The more I learned about their relationship, the angrier I got. Here I was mourning 5 years and trying to understand where things went wrong, while Luke was apparently living his best life with someone he barely knew. It felt so unfair and backwards. I decided to text him one more time, laying everything on the line. I apologized for needing space and told him I was ready to work on things together. I admitted that maybe I'd been too harsh during our fight and that I missed what we had. Surely he couldn't ignore a genuine attempt to reconcile, but his response was brief and cold. He said he appreciated the apology, but that he'd moved on and was happy with Naomi. He hoped I could find happiness too and asked me to respect his new relationship. Respect. After 5 years together, he owed me more than a polite dismissal. 6 months later, I was trying to move forward with Marcus when I saw them together at a coffee shop downtown. Luke and Naomi sitting in a corner booth, completely absorbed in whatever conversation they were having. My stomach dropped, but I told myself I was over this and could handle it like an adult. Watching them interact was honestly disturbing. They were so comfortable with each other, laughing at inside jokes and finishing each other's sentences. Luke looked more relaxed than I'd ever seen him, like he didn't have a care in the world. It was actually offensive how happy he seemed. What really got to me was how Naomi touched his arm when she laughed and how he looked at her like she was the most fascinating person alive. I'd been with Luke for 5 years and he'd never looked at me that way. Not even in the beginning when everything was new and exciting. Marcus noticed I was distracted and tried to comfort me, but I couldn't stop staring at them. They seemed to genuinely enjoy each other's company, which was confusing because Luke had always been pretty serious and intense with me. With her, he was cracking jokes and smiling constantly. When Luke got up to order drinks, our eyes met for a split second across the cafe. He didn't look angry or hurt or regretful. He just looked indifferent, like I was a stranger. He vaguely recognized but had no emotional connection to. That hurt more than if he'd seemed upset. The whole interaction lasted maybe 30 seconds, but it shattered something inside me. This wasn't some rebound relationship or revenge dating. Luke was genuinely happy with this woman in a way he'd never been with me. And she seemed equally content, like they'd found exactly what they were looking for in each other. A year later, my entire life had collapsed. And honestly, I'm still trying to figure out how everything went so wrong so fast. It's like the universe decided to punish me for wanting independence and setting boundaries with a man who couldn't handle a strong woman. Things with Marcus fell apart pretty quickly after that day at the coffee shop. He said I was still too hung up on Luke to be in a real relationship, which was unfair because I was genuinely trying to move on. But apparently, wanting to process my feelings about seeing my ex was too much emotional baggage for him. After Marcus, I tried dating other guys, but everyone seemed to have impossible standards or wanted some perfect woman who didn't exist. I'd go on dates and they'd disappear after one or two meetings, probably intimidated by my strong personality and independence. It was exhausting trying to find someone mature enough to handle a real woman. Meanwhile, I kept hearing updates about Luke and Naomi through mutual friends. They'd moved in together after just 6 months, which seemed incredibly rushed and reckless, but apparently everyone thought they were perfect together and meant to be. It was nauseating how people bought into their fairy tale romance. The worst news came when I found out they'd gotten engaged. Engaged after barely a year together. It was such an obvious rebound situation, but everyone was acting like it was some great love story. I felt embarrassed for Luke rushing into marriage with someone he barely knew. I may have reached out to congratulate him and mentioned that I hoped he was sure about what he was doing, just looking out for someone I'd cared about for 5 years. But apparently that was considered inappropriate contact, and people started saying I was harassing him. Such an overreaction to genuine concern. This work became a nightmare around this time, too. I'd been dealing with some difficult coworkers who didn't appreciate my direct communication style, uh, and things exploded when I called out their passive aggressive behavior in a team meeting. Suddenly, I was labeled as difficult to work with and creating a hostile environment. My supervisor started documenting everything I did and monitoring my every move. It was clear they wanted me gone, probably because I made the other women in the office feel insecure about their own lack of ambition and drive. I ended up getting fired for poor team dynamics, which was basically code for refusing to kiss everyone's butt. Being unemployed while watching Luke land his perfect wedding was probably the lowest point of my life. I'd see their engagement photos online and want to scream about how fake and rushed everything was. Naomi with her basic style and Luke pretending to be some romantic guy when he'd never been that way with me. I may have left some comments on their wedding venue social media trying to warn other couples about booking clients who abandon long-term relationships so callously. I was just trying to help other women avoid the same heartbreak I'd experienced. But apparently that was considered harassment too. Luke actually got a restraining order against me over some Facebook comments about his character. It's a restraining order over trying to warn people about how he treats women who love him. It was such a massive overreaction and made me look like some unhinged ex when I was just being honest about his behavior. The legal issues were humiliating and expensive. I had to hire a lawyer while I was already struggling financially from being unemployed. Potential employers would Google my name and find court records, making it even harder to find decent work anywhere. I ended up having to move back in with my parents at 28, which was devastating. All my friends were getting married and building careers while I was sleeping in my childhood bedroom, trying to figure out where everything went wrong. My mom kept asking what I'd done to drive Luke away, like it was somehow my fault. The wedding happened without me, obviously, but I saw all the pictures online. Luke looked happier than I'd ever seen him dancing with his basic bride and surrounded by all our former mutual friends. People who used to be my friends were now celebrating his new life like I'd never existed. What really stung was seeing how natural and healthy they looked together. It's not like two people rushing into something, but like they'd found exactly what they were looking for. The photos showed genuine joy and connection, which forced me to admit that maybe this wasn't just a rebound after all. But here's what nobody understands. I wasn't the villain in this story. I was a woman who asked for space to process her feelings. And instead of respecting that basic request, Luke immediately ran to another woman. I was the one who got abandoned and replaced. Yet, somehow, I'm the one who ended up isolated and struggling. Everyone acts like I should just be happy for them and move on with my life. But it's not that simple when someone throws away 5 years like it meant nothing. When they find their soulmate the second you're not available to manage their emotions and insecurities anymore. I'm not bitter or jealous, I'm just realistic about what happened and how unfairly I've been treated by everyone involved. Luke couldn't handle 1 month of space from a strong, independent woman. So he settled for someone who would never challenge him or push him to grow. And somehow I'm the bad guy for pointing out how messed up that is. Now I'm 29, starting over completely, while my ex of 5 years is living his perfect life with some woman he barely knew. If that's not cosmic injustice, I don't know what is. But I'm not giving up. Eventually, people will see through their fake happiness and realize what Luke really threw away when he chose comfort over real love.